Welcome to Brain Friends, where two neuro nerds talk all things aphasia, language recovery, culture, and community. I am Dr. Katrina Celeste Gatson, a clinical speech-language pathologist and neuroscientist.
And I am Angie Cawthorn, stroke survivor and aphasia advocate.
Welcome to our show.
Welcome to Brain Friends.
We want to thank all of our listeners for downloading the podcast. We appreciate everyone listening, so please tell a friend to tell a friend that we are here.
And we are.
Hey, Angie.
Dr. Celeste, what is good with you today?
How are you?
I am blessed and highly favored as always. What is going on with you?
Well, I am so excited because today we are doing Neuroplasticity 2, and we have a special guest.
Dun, 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 dun. Dun, dun, dun.
So our special guest is Dr. Roy Hamilton. I actually met him because he invited me to the Black Aphasia call.
Yes, the one that I met you. Wait a minute. I met you. He brought you to the call, and then I met you on the call, and now we have our podcast, and we're inviting him to our podcast that we all met on the call.
Full circle.
Okay. Come on, circle.
All right. Well, Dr. Roy, introduce yourself.
Hi, Dr. Roy.
Hi, thank you. It is so wonderful to be here. It's so wonderful to close the circle. So my name is Roy Hamilton. I am a behavioral neurologist at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm a professor there in the departments of neurology, psychiatry, and physical medicine and rehabilitation. And I run a laboratory and a center that are devoted to the use of non-invasive brain stimulation. So that's magnetic and electrical stimulation of the brain, non-invasive. We don't open anybody up. And we use these tools to understand how the brain is structured, or what parts of the brain are good for what, by manipulating them with these magnets and electrodes. And then we also try to take those discoveries and insights and bring them into patient populations who have cognitive deficits on the basis of neurologic disease, and to try to remediate, to try and help those individuals use these technologies to recover the abilities that they've lost. A lot of our focus, I would say most of the focus of our laboratory goes to persons living with aphasia, either due to stroke or due to neurodegenerative disease. So that's what I do in my research life. Administratively, I'm also the vice chair for inclusion and diversity for the Department of Neurology at the University of Pennsylvania. I spent almost 10 years as one of the assistant deans for diversity and inclusion in the medical school there. And I am very interested and passionate about the diversity in the neurology workforce and the workforce of individuals who are caring for patients with aphasia and other neurologic disorders, as well as equity when it comes to patients suffering from neurologic disease. So that's a quick overview of my life.
That was not quick. That is a total mouthful.
Talk about goals.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Right. You're just out here making us look like we are not trying. Like, I'm just not doing my best.
I shared with Angie when we got started how I was nervous about today's episode because Dr. Roy is just so distinguished and doing all the things. And so we appreciate you for being here
and taking the time.
So first of all, I don't know what the two of you are talking about, because I know for a fact you are both amazing. So I don't know why you're treating me like this, but thank you.
Well, if you say it, it must be true.
Okay.
It must
Let the record show.
Exactly.
Well, let's get into an icebreaker, because if we don't do an icebreaker, then the people will let us know.
We hear about it. People get antsy if we don't do the icebreaker. So we'll pass it to our, you want to pass it to our guest first?
Yeah. Okay. So the icebreaker today is I want you to name a high school memory that still makes you laugh.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to warn you. It makes me laugh. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's funny. Okay, but it makes me laugh, and I've kind of got like a kind of life lesson I kind of took from it. So,
I love it.
I'll still tell you the story. So, let me back up. In high school, I mean, who am I kidding? I was a really good kid. I mean, like straight-laced kid that, didn't drink, didn't smoke, went to school every day. Like that was me. It's still me. I had one thing though. I did one thing because I was living in Southern California. I loved to drive fast. Right. Just a speed demon. Like my parents knew this. That's why when I was 16 and I was like, Mom, Dad, you got to get me a Mustang. They're like, no, you get a Chevy Cavalier. You get a 1987 brown Chevy Cavalier, like the kind of car you do not want to roll up to a date in. And but I still drove it fast. So
yeah, you
one
did.
day I'm on my way
the best it could do, you were on it.
Yeah, I was on it. Like pedal touching the floor. I'm coming around and my rationalization is that I'm late for school, right? But really I'm just trying to figure out reasons why I can drive 70 miles an hour on the street. And for those who following the podcast who live in Long Beach, I'm coming to the intersection where Studebaker meets Los Coyotes Diagonal. It's a curve, and the car does this thing where two of the wheels come off. I'm driving like Dukes of Hazzard style.
Oh wow!
All right, and I'm like, oh, I see what's going to happen now. I'm about to die. And
I see what's happening here.
And the car fishtails, and I like swim around, and I ram into a bus stop, like one of those big thick bus stop poles, sever it completely from the ground.
My.
Keep going. Hit a fence to the local junior high that had two metal poles. They wrap around my car like a C, like they turn my car into a burrito of chain link fence, and my car is like bent like a pretzel. And this is pre airbags, right? Just me and my seatbelt, and I am totally untouched. Like the car is total. The car is just a mess, right?
Just
I don't know what
mangled.
happens. Mangled. I don't know what happens for the next half hour because somebody called the police and somebody called my parents and AAA. I don't remember any of that, but I do remember watching my classmates driving by to school and having to be like, hey, and being scared. And I remember being scared of two things. First, that I was late to school because remember, straight laced. And then the second thing was that my mom and dad were going to kill me, which of course was not true because they were too busy thanking God I was alive.
Exactly.
Right.
At least my mom was. My dad kind of felt a certain way, and it took him years.
Once that adrenaline wore off,
once the adrenaline wore off,
about this Cavalier.
And it didn't help it. It took him like 6 years to fix the fence. So then every time we're driving by, my dad's like, "Hey, you remember that time?" I was like, "Yeah, I was there. I remember."
I'm good,
so,
Dad. I remember.
I'm good. So every time I think of it, I still laugh, and I laugh for a couple of reasons. I mean,
because that was my next part. What makes you laugh about?
Oh my God. Because I was stupid.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
okay.
And if you don't laugh at yourself when you're being stupid, then it hurts more when other people laugh at you for being stupid, right? So you got to take the preemptive strategy.
The preemptive strike.
Yeah, right. Preemptive strike on stupidity. And then the second thing is I laugh not because it's funny. I laugh out of joy. I am lucky to be alive.
In your brain.
Right? Right. And completely untouched, unscathed. And I think, if this event was clearly meant to kill me, and maybe if it didn't, maybe that means I was meant to do something more worthwhile than, just end up a smudge on a bus stop in Long Beach.
Wow.
Right. And so, I hope I've done that. But it's one of those stories that just makes me smile and think about my life.
That is awesome. That's a great story.
That's a real good story.
That is a good story. So you were just them good old boys. You were just Dukes of Hazzard, right?
I mean, I mean, not exactly Dukes of Hazzard on account of
It was
I
a
didn't have the
Cavalier.
general. Yeah, it was a Cavalier that did not have the Confederate flag painted on it,
Which
right?
is nice, which is also
Yeah,
nice.
which is nice, which is also
Good-
nice.
good
but
look.
Yes, yeah, good look. But
Always forward thinking, I tell you what.
Yeah. But yes,
Wow.
I was a demon on the road.
Now, are you still?
No. I'm a dad with 2 teenagers. I'm like that, and this guy. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll see.
For the viewers, he was driving Miss Daisy. I mean, for the listeners, that was the motion. He was, driving Miss Daisy.
Yes.
Very slow. Slow driver now.
Just don't cut me off.
Don't go.
Okay, right. But if somebody pulls up and gives the vroom, vroom, you're like,
right.
You have this thing that can kind of click in.
That's right. It's like Fast and Furious.
Angie, what about you? Do you have a high school memory that still makes you laugh?
I don't have I do, but I have to tell my racing story now because we have Dr. Roy here.
Okay.
I have to tell my racing story. So prior to my strokes, I was a finance manager at a large dealership. And I have a Kia Optima, and I used to manage Kia before I went to this other dealership. That's not the point. The moral of the story is one of my coworkers was talking some smack, and we got off pretty late, and we're on 95. And I'm embarrassed to say how I don't even like to tell the story how fast I was going. Right on
Yikes.
I-95 at like Dr. Celeste is like, lady, why are you telling this story? So I'm racing this kid. I have no business. He's like 19 with nothing to lose. I have a mortgage. I have problems if anything goes awry. But we're racing. Okay,
in a Kia. In a
Kia. Yeah, I dropped it in sport, and I smoked him like a pack of Cools. And 2 hands. But
which made it safer.
Good. That's
I guess.
safe.
And it was a straightaway on 95 at like maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock at night because dealerships
And
close
you wore your
late.
seatbelt.
See, Dr. Roy gets it. Thank you, Dr. Roy. You see, she's already beginning to berate me and think less of me.
No. I may remember it next time I'm in the car with you, but definitely no judgment here.
Well, I would never do that again. It was definitely, yeah. And that Kia, you drop it in sport. Oh yeah, it's sporty.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's a good story.
Thank you, Dr. Oh, what's your favorite? What's your funny story from high school, Dr. Celeste?
So mine is, I had a thing, and I might have shared this before, about calling the news outlets if I felt like something was going wrong at my high school.
No.
So if I felt like something was going wrong at the high school, I would call the news, and I would then invite the news over to the house, and they would do interviews and things like that. But I never told my mom because I thought it was like I wanted to surprise her when she turned on the 6 o'clock news and she saw me talking about whatever I felt like I needed to complain about in the high school. So this one time I called the news. I don't know. I won't get into why I called, but I called the news because something happened at the high school that I didn't think was fair. And, they came in and I was all excited and we sat down and we watched the news. And believe it or not, Mom was upset that I called the news and I had them in the house interviewing me while she wasn't home.
And you are how old?
My goodness, why?
Like, why was she upset?
Right. Why is she not letting you be great? Why is she trying to see you
unimaginable? What's keeping you down? What's going on, Mom?
Right? I was like 17. Yeah, like 16, 17.
What I need to know is, I mean, you don't have to get into specifics, but what category of issues were you like, this is worth calling the news about? Like, I mean, were they
At
like,
16.
Okay. So
At
I'll
16.
share the issue. So in my high school, so I grew up in the South, I grew up in Georgia, and every Black History Month, so I had to be in the 11th grade. So I was probably almost 17. So we always had Black History Month gatherings and, what's it called? Like assemblies. And so for some reason, they would allow all of the white students to come late that day. Like they didn't have to attend the assembly and they wouldn't get marked tardy. And this went on for like years. And then finally, I just said, like, that wasn't fair because we would then have to go. And it was the Black History Assembly that was okayed for, that you can come late. And then it was just always this thing. They would hang out at Chick-fil-A and come in and, it just,
right. And then
it just was the thing. Like, we don't go to the Black History Assembly. And I just didn't think it was right. So I called the news about it. And then they came to interview me. So that happened. And so then following a little later, I called.
But what happened to the assembly?
Well, the assembly would go on.
Did being on the news change it?
Oh, yeah. So then senior year, they had to come.
Okay.
Yeah. Senior year, they had to come. But I got smart because when they did the follow-up interview for me to see if anything had changed or if the school had addressed it, I didn't invite them inside. I interviewed them. I had them interview me on our porch.
As if the inside the house was the issue, not your mother not knowing that you were.
As if that makes it better, because now people know what your house looks like.
Yeah, and then she said that. She was like, no, it's not about, whether it's inside the house or outside the house. Like because then, of course, she got called into the principal's office because they labeled it as troublemaking, which I disagree with that. I think I was being an advocate. And, she was like, I want to support you, but you got to let me know. You can't just say, let's turn on the news and you're sitting there with a big grin and you're the spokesperson for everything going on.
Talking about surprise.
Look what's on the 6:00 news.
Right. You're supposed to be coming in with maybe a nice dinner, an A on a test. Surprise, Mom, I did so much better than we thought. And you coming in on the evening news.
And the second time she got mad, I said, Mom, I didn't invite them in. You said that I had to do it on the outside. So then I realized it was a thing of she wanted to know. And also us talk through things first before I just immediately go calling the news because I felt like something was wrong.
So diversity and inclusion has always been a part of your life. I'm
an advocate.
Foreshadowing.
Look at me now. Oh my goodness. Okay. So that was pretty awesome. And Dr. Roy, I want to jump right into it because I got a lot of neuroplasticity questions.
Okay.
No pressure. Maybe. Okay. So my first question is, how does neuroplasticity work and why is it important for recovery?
Okay. So the first thing I want to do is take a big step back and just think about the fact that brains are in large part designed to change, to alter how they work on the basis of experience. Okay. So, we think people tend to think of their brains as kind of static, but just this thing that's in their head. But every experience you have is altering how your brain functions, right? I mean, the talk we're having right now is, and the points we make, if we learn something, if you make a memory out of what we have done here today, right? That is a minor alteration in how your brain is organized, right? And so your brain is always in the process of making plastic changes. It's how you learn anything. It's how you change in response to anything. Okay. And so those same principles, that same idea of plasticity is also the bedrock of recovery from injury. Right? When you have a brain injury of any type, or a stroke, a traumatic brain injury, if you're going to have a set of deficits, a set of problems that you then have more trouble, things that you have more trouble negotiating. But if as time goes by, any of those things get easier at all, and it's because your brain reorganized to allow for that to happen, right? It must have. Something must have changed. And so neuroplasticity is that process. And a lot of it happens because the brain kind of adapts and changes in response to its own activity. You may have heard this saying at some point, if you've been around the neuroscience world, that neurons that fire together wire together. There's this idea that if groups of, if parts of the brain start to fire in different patterns, if they keep going in that way, it makes it more likely that they'll keep firing in those patterns in the future. So brain activity patterns can shift and in response to things like injury, and those shifts can kind of get reinforced, get strengthened. So the brain starts to operate in new ways, right, in response to injury, and as you're undergoing recovery, that then over time help to compensate for whatever your injury may have been. And so, again, brains are super plastic. That's their fundamental quality, and that is the core, right, of recovery after injury. And a lot of what we do in our lab is to try and nudge that along even further.
Go, Angie. I saw your brow frown.
You made Dr. You made a comment like the neurons that fire together stay together. Is that what you said?
It's a little rhyme, like neurons that fire together wire together. So it means that if you've got it's actually something that comes from neuroscience, where they've noticed that neurons that are connected to each other, if they're firing near or around the same time, they tend to strengthen their connection to one another. But you can think of that more broadly in terms of patterns of brain activity, that if you're, when your brain is injured, if it starts to reorganize how it does something it used to do with the part of the brain that was injured, right? If it starts to reorganize its activities, well, if that becomes its new habit, right, then that becomes a kind of new, the new normal, if you will, right? The new organization by which the brain accomplishes those tasks, because those brain areas have started to fire together. They've started to, again, sort of strengthen their connections and as we say in science, wire together.
All right. So if you injure a part, the new ones fire around where the damage was, and that gets where the strengthening happens, and then it gets reconnected.
Well, it can, but that's not always what happens. Let's take a kind of concrete example. Okay. So let's take strokes that give rise to aphasia, for example. Okay, sort of familiar territory for us. So
I've heard of it.
Yeah, I hear you heard of it. Yeah, that's right. In that case, areas of the brain that for persons who haven't had strokes, for those individuals, areas of the brain that normally accomplish language, when the individual who's had a stroke, those areas may be damaged. Big parts of that sort of network of areas may be destroyed, right? Because stroke can actually just take out whole areas of brain. So if that happens, right, and the person starts with a certain level of aphasia, but over time there's a change, there's some improvement. It means that something additional must have happened, right? And often what happens is that areas that are next door neighbors, if you will, to the areas that were damaged might pick up some slack. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we've observed, often, in fact, we've observed that areas that are on the other side of the brain than the side of the brain that often is engaged in persons who don't have aphasia, which, by the way, is the left side. Often for individuals with aphasia, they're also engaging their right side, right? So basically, there's new patterns of activity that seem to arise in individuals who have had damage to the normal circuit, right? Now, those new patterns may not be able to accomplish the task quite as well as the old area had been able to, but they're still critical for getting us to some level of recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why, the kinds of studies we do, at least, are geared at trying to figure out if we can push those areas to function even a little better in the service of doing what the part that was damaged used to do.
All right. So I have an analogy. So I used to have a Mustang, and then I had a stroke, and now I have a brown Cavalier, right? And now I have a brown Cavalier, and I'm trying to, the brown Cavalier is getting me where I have to go. But as I add more stuff and get a kit and maybe put this new engine in, it gets better and better over time. And that's for the neuroplasticity, the part that's it's getting the more parts and things I put in it, the faster it can go, but it will never go as fast as my original Mustang.
Yeah, I think that's right. You're talking about some parts of the brain that may not have originally been tasked with the job, or may not have been the optimal system for the job, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you ever seen a Mustang and a Cavalier side by side, you know what I'm talking about. but plasticity means that, like, maybe these areas that weren't originally optimal for the job can somehow be brought up to the point where they're contributing in a meaningful way.
Right. Even though that's what it was never meant to go that fast, but
that's right.
Drop this nitro.
As long as you don't hit the bus stop.
That's amazing. Okay. Well, let me ask you this, Dr. Roy. Does neuroplasticity stop working? Like, are there inherent limits to what can be done?
Yes, neuroplasticity stops working when you die.
Okay.
Yes, I'm so glad you said that. Not the whole, but that reality. Because so many times I think that as speech language pathologists and other practitioners, they are so quick to say that the client plateaued, or this insight that comes off like that's just it. Like, neuroplasticity is done, their therapy is done, because they are as good as they're going to get. So I'm so glad you said that happens when you die.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There is this idea that is prevalent, right? You know this, that there's some window, and it's certainly true. Right after an injury, this part's true. After an injury, there is a kind of steeper window of neuroplastic, or steeper period of neuroplastic change. Sure, right? And people go from the worst part of their symptoms to something different than that, in that acute subacute period. But it's this idea that you then level off and it's flat and you're done, right? There's evidence that can keep going if people keep working at it, right? So plasticity and behavioral improvements can keep going. And so, it's funny, we've sort of bought into this notion that neuroplasticity stops when, I don't know, when the insurance coverage for speech language therapy ends.
Okay, come through with that statement. Say that statement one more time.
Right? For the people in the back.
For the people in the back, yes.
Right? We cover it for just a period of time, and then we're like, well, that must be the window over which it's effective. I mean, no, we shouldn't let insurance companies tell us when neuroplasticity ends.
Right. But this is where I think I lucked out, because I availed myself to research, and I went and I got so much better in my rate of speech, and it made such a huge difference. But this is why you have to let people know that there is things that you can do after you get out that office. But
Right.
you have to take the responsibility. You have to know that it's available. And I'm of the thinking that people would be more responsible to do it if they knew it was available.
Right. Yeah.
That's
right.
Because how do you let people know, and also let people know it's safe?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Black community has a little we ain't that trusting with the research folk. We ain't got. It hasn't always worked out in our favor. So,
Yeah, it often has not.
But I think some of that too, Dr. Roy, you talk about a lot of the work that you do in your lab. Do you think the diversity in your lab, even if it is just you, helps to ease some of that trust? Because when, you're going in and you're about to start these studies and the individuals see you.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, if you think it's just me, you got to go to my website. Right. I mean, we have a really diverse group. And I think that, first of all, let's take a page out of the clinic and what we know about clinical environments, because there's very good evidence that when there is greater diversity in clinical environments, when people can actually see people who, remind them of themselves, that engenders greater trust more readily, right? It puts people at ease. And so to have an environment like that, that people know that, well, they may not know it the first time before they arrive, but they know when they arrive that they're not just entering a space that's going to be homogeneous and completely unlike them. I think that's really, really valuable. And it's part of what makes it important that the field of research in aphasia, the field of research in brain injury, that it be more diverse, right? Because you can't actually fulfill your health equity goals with respect to research, or maybe you can, but it would certainly be much harder if you didn't have any representation in the team itself.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, the other thing that I wanted, you had mentioned insurance dollars and also speech language pathologists. And, do you have any tips for practitioners working in neurorehabilitation? And when I say practitioners, especially because we're talking about aphasia, I'm specifically thinking speech language pathologists, but we know we have listeners of all rehabilitative disciplines. So just, any tips that you have for practitioners working in neurorehabilitation?
Yeah. So can I tell you my first thought about this question?
Yeah.
Which is,
sure.
Okay, I'm a neurologist and I'm a researcher, and you're going to ask me to give tips to practitioners in neurorehabilitation, right? Like, I'm like, well, why are you going to ask
implementation?
Why are you going to ask me to mansplain something to people that I'm not actually that person? Like, okay, all right, well,
if you insist,
but I'm going to turn it on its head a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to say is to teach back, right? People often don't think this way, but to teach back to those other clinicians who are part of the chain in terms of, where patients come from who require neurorehabilitation. And I realize when one says teach, you might be thinking about teaching the patient. In this particular context, I'm talking about my colleagues. That the typical neurologist, they might see the patient in the acute setting when they have the worst of their stroke. They might be sort of taking measures. They might see them subacutely afterwards. But a lot of these clinicians don't have a lot of insight into the long-term outcomes for their patients and the things that determine those outcomes and the specifics of the road and what it takes to get them there, right? And that's because they're siloed from the practitioners who are really making it happen, right? And that's a shame, because I'm sure that we would make other choices or advocate for other choices if we had if your typical neurologist had or other clinician who's seeing the acute patient had a clear sense of what it took to get people where they need to go, the road in between, and what practitioners need to get them there, right? So sort of teach back to the rest of your team. And then, I can't help but stump for research a little bit, because we are still in every form of recovery, we're still looking for better and better interventions, right? And interventions that can spur plasticity in the brain, which we've been talking about, get people closer to where they had been prior to their, in terms of their performance prior to their events. And research is an important way to get us there. So if individuals can be familiar, practitioners can be familiar with what's going on in their area, right? Whether it's by looking at the websites for the institutions, the major institutions in the area, or clinicaltrials.gov, or maybe the National Aphasia Association website. I mean, however they get informed about what's
art, the Aphasia
goes without
Collaboration
saying.
Hub. Hello.
Or
you better plug it.
What an excellent resource, let me tell you, in our area, in the Philadelphia area. I think that's super important. And the last piece I'll say about this is that it's sort of an add-on to what I just said, right? The representation in the clinical research population is highly skewed, right? It is not diverse. I mean, how's it going to be the case that that African Americans have twice the risk of developing a stroke, right? And yet they can be so hard to find in a trial for the most common focal deficit associated with stroke, right? That is a disparity. And
we're going to try to recruit.
Yeah, not informing your patients of these opportunities is a kind of inequity, right? Because it means that certain people who have better access to better information get access to cutting edge interventions, and people who don't have access to that kind of information just don't. Right. So that's my third piece of advice for practitioners.
Love it. Tell
that's
them.
Good.
That's no, listen, the thing is it's so important. And those words, those communication between the practitioner, the researcher, and the client and the caregiver has got to be strengthened, because there is help available. I'm proof of it. Over here making whole sentences and everything. Stop. It's too much.
Yeah. Can I say one more thing about this?
Of course.
Okay. So we've talked about diversity in trials from the perspective of the person with aphasia, right? You're talking about a gap in opportunity here that is important to try and fill. But you can look at it a different way too, which is the quality of the science. Okay. And here we get into something called concepts of generalizability and applicability. And so what I mean is, if you run a trial, right, you run a study, and that study only has like a little tiny segment of the population, right? It's super homogeneous, doesn't, there are lots of people who are not represented in that trial. There is no guarantee that when you take that new treatment and you give it to a population of people who come from all walks of life, that treatment is going to work for everyone. Right. And so it's not just unfair for people who don't have an opportunity to be in the trial. It threatens the quality of the science that comes out of the trial for studies to not have diversity.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's existential to the field.
God, that's good.
So what's the answer? So how do we do better?
Well, if there was a simple answer, we would have done it already.
That's fair. That's fair.
Right?
That's
That's
fair.
right. But I think, we have to have a better strategies and strategies that are more geared towards forming trusting partnerships with the communities that we want to engage and that we want to benefit from research, right? I mean, we're starting from behind, right? We're starting from a trust gap, right? And so you have to do more. And you can't just put up a flyer. You can't just post something on a website, because that's there are all sorts of reasons why that's just not going to be effective. And so we have been working increasingly, and obviously your work is instrumental in trying to really engage people where they live, right? And to first of all educate the public writ large, right, about these kinds of problems, right? I mean, again, I know you have all sorts of listeners. You're famous, but I'll say,
you said it, not me.
I said it.
Manifesting.
Right. I know you're not going to cut that. For those of us who work in the aphasia world, right? I mean, the most common focal cognitive deficit associated with one of the most common neurologic diseases of all. And yet, you ask people up and down the street, tell me a little bit about aphasia. What are you going to get, right? So we have to educate, we have to engage, and we really have to do it in a way that involves partnership, often partnership with communities. So that's the overarching solution.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah, that's one of the things I think as hardest about aphasia, out of everything else that you lose, people don't even recognize what the word that you're saying to them. So it's, you're coming in at such a high deficit. You're already so behind the eight ball, and then you can't explain to them what it is because you have aphasia. So round and round we go. I would tell you, but I can't talk. You don't know what I'm saying. It's definitely pretty difficult.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Angie, we're almost out of time, so I want you to get your questions in, but I did want to just follow up when you said the recruitment piece. I think the other thing that's really important with recruitment is with the flyers, having being intentional, even from the flyer, even from the study design of the population that you want to include and get. I had a colleague one time, and she wanted to recruit African-American stroke survivors, but on her recruitment flyer, the picture was neutral. And she said, she was like, oh, well, I asked everyone, it said it was okay. And my, just question about it was people need to see themselves. And, if you want to recruit a certain type of population, then be intentional about that, even from the flyer perspective.
Right. But the problem is they're so used to not even seeing us that it doesn't even, it wasn't until the last 20 years where I could even get a Hallmark card with a person that looked like me on it. We had to go with the animated version because it was never us that was walking in the park and in love or growing. It was never a picture of older Black people. It's never us. Matter of fact, I remember I told my father joked on one of the big birthday cards he gave. He's like, yeah, I don't know who these people in the front are. I don't know who these... But, I love you, but I don't know who these jokers are supposed to be. But that's because we just weren't represented. And we already knew that. We didn't even expect to be represented in Hallmark. My point is, I can see why that person might have not have seen it, because it's just not something that they would have come across unless you're
True.
being intentional.
True.
Right.
True.
Yeah, they
Right.
don't even know it's missing
Yeah.
because we're so non-existent in that. And you can go all day and not be bothered.
Mm-hmm.
You can
That's
go
right.
all
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
All
That's right. And that intentionality, I mean, that has to be present in your research operation,
Yes.
right? You can't just say, well, we're going to have a general strategy. And, if we turn up the volume on our general strategy enough, then, persons from underserved communities, minoritized persons will come because, I don't know, it's such a good strategy overall. No, you need a specific strategy for engagement. In our lab, we just, about middle of last year, we got an award from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and it was a Science Diversity Award. And so now a substantive portion of that award funds a specific engagement, a specific outreach engagement program for for Philadelphia's Black community.
Wow.
Right?
Nice.
And we sort of try to conceptualize how we're going to engage members of that community in specific ways, rather than just our general advertising strategy for aphasia trials, which I can tell you if our general strategy does not bring in that population. So
Mhm.
Right.
Again, intentionality is key.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have to you have to advertise. You gotta. It's tough, and make it interesting and involving. And what's the word I want? It's engagement. You have
That's
to
right.
engage people where they are. You just can't expect them to just show up on the 8th floor of your lab. Like, it's not going to happen.
That's right. And I have one more thing to say about this, which is what we want, and what I think researchers, all who are engaged in this effort, should want, is not to be extractive, right? In other words, our goal is not to just parachute into a community, be like, all right, we're here now, who can participate in our research, and then we're gone, right? Like, so, our goal is to engage, to educate about aphasia, tell people about what resources are out there, really sort of help people understand and give communities something, right? We give first, and then, once, if there's trust, if there's partnership, then we ask whether or not people are interested in wanting to participate in the kind of work that we do, because we're not here to practice research colonialism.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So how can a survivor intentionally work on neuroplasticity to regain function?
You got to work at it, right? It is a lot. Well, let's go back to what we talked about plasticity for top of the conversation. Okay, so it's the case that when the brain is in use, it is that use that causes the brain to reorganize. So that means that it's about practice and use, and practice and use, and more than just those couple of days a week that you're going to see the therapist, right? The therapist isn't the only time you practice that skill. The therapist is more like it's more like your personal trainer, right?
Wow.
But if you only worked out, if you only exercised on the days you saw your personal trainer, if that was your only exercise, it's not going to help, right? And so it's going to take a lot of work and trial and error on the part of the individual.
That is so good.
Yeah. Yeah. What about anxiety? Angie, did you want to ask anything about anxiety?
Yeah, I did.
Before we get out of here?
With when I had my stroke, but bottom line is, I want to know what is people with strokes, I want to know why they have a higher rate of anxiety. is it kind of the cognition part? Is it the embarrassment of it? Like, what is it that's causing this immense amount after a stroke? It's like my anxiety was just off the chain, and I found that I'm not alone in that. So I'm wondering, is there any information you can give me on that?
Well, I think that it would be hard for me to say it's definitely because this, that, the other thing, but I have three answers for you.
Okay.
All right. So the first is that the average person who has a significant stroke has had a traumatic event happen to them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They have had and I'm talking about what happens at the time of stroke. I mean, these people are, I don't necessarily need to share the stroke story, but you hear so many stories of how it occurs to people, and then everything that's going to happen next for the next 24, 48 hours in the hospital, right? They're going to get the procedures, and it's like super chaotic environment. And they're confused, and they don't always know what's happening, and it's life threatening, right? So a certain number of those people are not going to walk out. It's a serious event. So to be traumatized by the event itself is one feature. Secondly, of course it's a range, right? But it can dramatically alter how you're engaging with every aspect of your life. And so now you go from living one way to, not by choice, living in a completely different way with new challenges everywhere you turn. Right. And
right.
Including social challenges, interpersonal challenges. I mean, the kinds of things that you would expect would provoke anxiety in people. Right. So you start with a traumatic event. Then you have an anxiety provoking alteration in your day-to-day lived experience after that. And then on top of that, well, I mean, let's talk about what organ just got injured. It is the organ that also helps you regulate and control your emotional states.
Water on the motherboard.
Right. So now you've got this combination of things, like something traumatic happened to you, your life is altered in these profound and anxiety-provoking ways, and the thing that you would use, the tool you would use to sort of control your own anxiety has been injured. Right. So it's no surprise that people facing that trifecta of challenges should be anxious.
Yeah, it was I'm gonna go ahead and go with unbearable. It was, and very shocking. Like I was so sad all the time, or just, it was just bad. And I couldn't, it was like, I told a friend of mine, it's hard to be mind over matter when it's your mind that's what's the matter. You can go ahead and write that down.
I'm going to write that.
Yeah,
I have a recording.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, you will. Go ahead and cite me on that. It's all good.
I will.
I think that's why it's also important for survivors to feel comfortable to talk to their neurologists and their practitioners about the anxiety and some of the psychological changes that are happening. So if medication is available that could at least help regulate that can be a conversation.
Absolutely. I think that's something that is very much under-discussed, not broached enough in the clinician's office when people are talking about how they are surviving and what they are doing to try to thrive in the follow-up from whatever their brain injury may be.
And it's definitely as the person here with the stroke, you just don't know what you don't know. And I was always taken aback at the things that I couldn't do, that I didn't know I couldn't do until I went to try them. I always talk about the kind of my shoe. I didn't know that was up for grabs. And then now I'm sitting around with my feelings hurt with 2 strings in my hand. I don't know what to do with them. But, luckily for me, I'm married to a great guy. To this day, he still ties my shoe for me. Oh, he's a sweetie. Shout out to Charles.
Okay, so we are over time. This has been absolutely amazing. But Dr. Roy, I have to ask you this one last question, which is about any new treatments you're excited about or research areas.
Oh, now I'm going to talk about my stuff.
As well, you should. Shameless plug.
Okay. Okay, so
plug.
shameless plug. All right. So I think that an important piece of what is to come in neurorehabilitation, in rehabilitation in general, involves directly targeting the brain. All right. So I'm not just going to plug my work. I'm going to plug all of neuromodulation, where the treatment isn't just a behavioral manipulation, a certain way of doing things, but it's augmenting those practices with interventions that directly talk to the circuits of the brain that have reorganized to try and help people accomplish those tasks, maybe nudge them a little further into neuroplastic states that'll help them recover their abilities, right? So in our work, we do that with magnets and electrodes. There are other groups that use other forms of neuromodulation. But I think in the future, as we understand more about how the circuits work, and we are understanding more and more about how these circuits work every year. So as we understand the circuitry of the brain better, we're going to be able to make targeted manipulations that are safe and also effective in trying to help people recover their abilities by helping the brain reorganize itself, right? And so that, I think, that's what gets me up in the morning with respect to the work in our lab. And I it's been more than a decade, and I still think it's the wave of the future.
That is awesome. Dr. Roy Hamilton, shout out to you, bro.
Shout out to you.
Shout out to you, man. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, taking the time, rocking out with us, rolling with the brain friends.
Brain friends.
Brain friend. You got to jump in with a brain friend. Come on.
Friend. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye.
All right. It was a joy. Thank you.
Peace, y'all.